Hi, today we're going to be creating a Mirage effect in Unreal Engine 5. Before we get underway, we need to start making essentially a layer that we can use to displace the environment behind this effect. So the reason that we're going to be making this asset is essentially we want to try and create a sense of heat in our Unreal Engine scene so that we can see sort of heat displacement happening in the background and on the roads. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to need to jump into Maya. Now, I have one here that I've already prepared. I will quickly go through and show the process for creating this. However, there is a bit of time where you have to sort of sit there and fiddle and tweak with the settings in order to get it just right. So I have pre-rendered these out, ready to go straight into Unreal. So before we get underway, I'll quickly show you the sort of the loose, quick process of how we actually get this effect here. So we'll start with a new scene. So I'll just quickly save this scene. This scene is saved as Mirage effect. We're going to go new scene. Now that we're in a new scene, we're primarily going to be using the FX tab. Now, things like Niagara will have effects that will do the similar things. They might even do it somewhat better. However, for this particular effect, we don't need anything super advanced or super complex. We just need a simple smoke simulation. So what we're going to be doing is we can either come to the FX tab and we can create a 3D fluid emitter container. I'm going to come up to fluids. First of all, go to your FX tab in the drop down menu. And we go to fluids, create 3D container, option box, and then just make sure that add emitter is turned on. The other things we're going to change in a bit. So apply that. Now we have a box. Now if you press play, you'll see that you get a cube of disgusting. Now we don't want a cube of disgusting, we want a nice smoke trail. So there's a few things that we have to do. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change the amount of frames that I have, because at the moment I've only got 52 frames, which is approximately 2 seconds at 24 frames per second plus a little bit. So I'm going to set this up to something higher, something in the range of say 600. And then I'm also going to come and grab this little doohickey down here and go up to there. And now we have 600 frames in our timeline, and we've got a reasonable amount of time for this simulation to happen over. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to curves. I'm going to come to the EP curve tool. I'm going to come into a top view, and I want this to be quite a long effect, so I'm going to hold in X and click once here, and then come over here, preferably an equal amount. I couldn't be bothered counting to make sure it's perfectly equal, but X and click there, and we're going to make one curve going straight across this scene. Press enter, and that'll create that curve. Press spacebar, and hold on, I'll just turn this thing on so you can see my mouse strokes. Bear with me one momento. There we go, we got the thing. Okay, back into Maya. Alright, so we're in Maya here. We have a curve. Now at the moment, if we right click on this curve and go control vertex, we've got 4 points on this curve. Now that's not even going to be close to enough. We're going to need a lot of points. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to turn this curve and its points into emitters. So every individual point across this curve is going to be its own little emitter. This can be quite heavy for a scene, so you kind of want to balance it to make sure you're not using too many, but also you want to have lowish spacing so that you don't get too much separation between the emitters. So object mode, drop down menu, modeling, curves, and we're going to come down to rebuild, and then we click on the option box. And we can leave everything as defaults. If you've played with this and you're not sure if it's defaults, you can always come to edit, reset settings, and that will reset the settings of the tool. Now I'm going to take this curve and I'm going to break this curve into something like, let's say 64. I'm going to have 64 spans across this curve, and then I'm going to press rebuild. It's going to look like it did nothing, but when we click on this now, right click and hold, control vertex, now we have 64 points along this curve. Now what I can do from here is I'm going to turn off my, I'm going to select my container. I'm going to select, just drag through both, and you're going to select this small point in the middle, which is the emitter, and then also the curve here. Once I have those selected, menu set, FX, we're going to come up to fields and solvers, and then we're going to come down to use selected as source, and then click that. That will reposition the emitter in the middle. Now, by default, as we do that, if I press play now, it's not really doing anything. So what I need to do is I need to actually select the emitter, which you'll find in the container. We can do it the other way as well, which is just drag select the lot and then deselect the oh, that's right. So we can, select the lot like so, deselect this by holding in control and dragging. Now I've got my emitter selected. You will also find it in your outliner if you open up the hierarchy of the curve that you just made, that you probably named. I'll lead by example, I suppose. Smoke screen curve. Okay, select that emitter, and then in this emitter, under here, under basic emitter attributes, we need to open this up, and we're going to set this from omni to curve. Now that we've done that, any curve that's inside the box should start to emit. We can get a wall. So now the issue that we have is that it looks like garbage, and we need the smoke screen to be wider to fit the width of our curve. So in order to do that, what we're going to do, I'm going to come to this container. I'm going to select the container, and there's a few ways that you can do this. You can set the container to automatically resize. If we set this to automatically resize and then press play, it will automatically resize the container for the emitter that we have and any smoke that happens. This can be handy. It also has a tendency to sort of provide clipping to your smoke screen in some cases. So for the time being, I'm going to not use this, and I'm going to turn this off. But this is a very handy feature to know about, to turn this on. So I'm going to turn that off, go back to the start of my thing, and for the time being, I'm just going to play around with the size of the container itself. So I'm going to scale it out so I'm holding in control and then right-clicking and dragging, right-clicking and dragging in the box here, sorry, to do it a lot. If you want fine control, you control and left-click and drag, and then you get finer control. That'll work for most input boxes in Maya. Now that I've done that, I'm also going to want to move the container up. I want the effect to be happening from the floor. I don't want it too close because I want to have just a little bit of room for noise to happen at the base level. So I'm going to take it to there, and then I'm also going to expand it a little bit so I've got a little bit more room to play with. And again, lift it back up. And something like this, for the time being, should be okay. Now I'm also going to set these to whole numbers because that'll make setting our resolution. Our resolution will be a little bit cleaner if we're setting it to whole numbers. So I'm going to set 64. I'm going to set this to 16. Pardon my phone. There we go. No sound on the phone. Come back to that in a second. Okay, so set that to 16. This is set to 10. Now, if you want, you can turn off keep voxels square, and you can manually input your resolution sizes. For the time being, we're just going to use the checkbox here to keep voxels square, and we're going to keep increasing this resolution. One thing to keep in note when you're increasing the resolution of the smoke simulation, as you increase the resolution, your density will become lower and lower and lower. So as we can see here, we've got quite a thick wall, but as I increase the resolution, the quality will get better, but you start to lose smoke. So I'm going to set it just to start with to 60. And as you can see, we're starting to lose that sense of smoke. So what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to set this up to 120. I'm essentially going to set it to what I want my final resolution to be. I have a pretty powerful computer, so it should run this relatively well. as you can see, as we go up higher and higher, we start to lose our density. So again, I might even take it up even further to 240. And again, it may run slowish, start to chug, because again, it's starting to ask a fair bit more of your PC. And now we're starting to get something that is a something. So from here, we need to play around with the settings a little bit. So the majority of the settings that we need to play with are in a few areas. One is under dynamic simulation. Then 2 is under contents detail. This is the most important section. This is where you really play around with all of the things that make your smoke feel smoky. So under density, you'll have a density scale slider, and then there's a whole bunch of options here for how this smoke interacts with the world, so to speak. So if I was to set the density scale down, I lose density. If I set it higher, I gain density. So I want this to be a relatively subtle effect, so I'm going to set it pretty low. Buoyancy indicates how quickly or how slowly or how inversely the smoke goes up or down. And then dissipation is how quickly the smoke disappears, and then diffusion is sort of how blurred the smoke becomes together. And then there's a whole bunch of other statistics in here that you can use that do various different things. Noise is pretty handy sometimes. The first thing I'm going to come to, though, however, is velocity and turbulence. These are the two big factors that actually will start to make the smoke feel like smoky smoke instead of a perfect column smoke. So I'm going to set the swirl to a number, and I'm going to set the strength of the turbulence to a number. And then when I press play, we should start to see that we get an effect happening like so. We start to get into the land of smoky smoke. Now that I have something like this, now it's worth keeping in mind that the beginning of this effect is not very good because it's all very even. There are ways that we can modify that. We're not going to worry about that for the time being. However, you can use fields and solvers to manipulate the smoke even further. We're not going to do that today, but that's a way that you avoid see all of these look exactly repeated, and we don't want that from the start of our sequence. However, when we go to put this in our scene, we're not going to be using it from the start of our sequence. We're more than likely going to be starting to use this sequence from somewhere around frame 200 to 300, and we'll sort of clip out all of the beginning part of the smoke, just until it starts to look natural, and then we'll use that as a sequence. So something like this is starting to look okay. However, it is still a bit too flamey. It's a bit too heavy-handed. So in order to reduce that, I have a few options. I have dissipation is one good option. This will make the smoke dissipate after a certain amount of time, so the smoke will try to essentially disappear a little quicker, which is a good way of like reducing the overall craziness of the effect. And then once we get to somewhere around here, we're starting to feel alright. It's still feeling a little bit clumpy, but once we get into that 300 frame range, it starts to match up and feel a bit more homogeneous, I guess you would say. Now again, we could play with this for quite a while until we get exactly the thing that we want. You can play with frequency and speed, and this will affect how quickly or how slowly the smoke moves. I am going to add a small amount of noise, and this will just increase the granularity of it somewhat. And now, this is essentially what I want it to look like. Now, we're going to be judging this from a front view specifically, as this is how we're going to be rendering it out. So we could play with this a fair bit more. There's a few other things that you can do that will add granularity to it depending on what you need this for. You can set this up to actually be ignition and be flame and smoke and all that sort of stuff, but for the time being we're not going to be doing any of that. We just need this essentially as a mask to displace our background. So the other thing that you can do is we can come into lighting, turn on self shadow, and this just adds a little bit of extra depth into the smoke. And again, play around with the settings until you find something that suits your needs. However, once we get to around about here, I'm just gonna play with these settings just a wee bit more. Get a bit more swirl in there. A bit more dissipation, and this is essentially what I would want in this area. Now, from here, the process is relatively simple. We need to render this out. So normally when you would render with Arnold, and you'd have lights in your scenes, and you'd do all of the fancy juju. We don't want fancy juju. We just want an alpha. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come to our little clapboard with the cog on it. Just here, display render settings. We're going to click. We're going to come here to where it says Arnold render and say no thank you. And going to come to Maya Hardware 2.0. In here, we're going to start setting up the output of our render. So to start with, I'm going to call this Mirage. I'll call it a Mirage mask, because that's essentially what this is going to be. Pingus are fine, PNG. And we're going to set this from frame animation extension down to frame hash extension. And you can choose the underscore hash if you wish. There's just different ways that it will be. And basically what this means is the name equals this, the hash equals the frame number, and the extension equals this. So again, I'm just going to set it to, I like to use this one, which is name, so it gives me the name, and then an underscore, and then the frame number dot PNG. I'm going to set my frame padding to nothing, because I don't really care about frame padding in this particular case. Frame padding just adds zeros to the frame count. So if I have this set to 3 pad or 2 padding, the hash will actually be my frame number with 2 zeros in front of it. I don't want that. I just want it to be named to be sequential. So I turn my frame padding down to nothing. And then we come down to this section here, and it says start frame. I'm happy for my start frame to start at 1. And then I also want my end frame to start at 6, or to end at 600. And then this by frame, this is a cheap way of rendering something out at 12 FPS if you wanted to. If you were to set this at 2, it would render every second frame instead of every frame. And now I'm going to come down to here, and I'm going to say I don't want to use my perspective camera. I want to use my front camera. So I'm going to select front. And then I'm going to come down to here to the presets, and I'm going to set this preset to 2K square. This should be ample for our purposes, although you can go it higher if you want a higher quality result. Now, I also don't have a lot of space. I don't have a lot of resolution need below or above. I could set this down here and render this from here, but I'm more than happy to have this from the center. But I don't need as much height as I have here, so I'm going to set this to 1024. And that is that for that part. Now, when we go to render this out, we need to choose somewhere to render this. So in order to do that, we can come to Edit, Change Project Image Directory, and essentially, this is going to allow you to set up a project for your project. So it will create basically a project hierarchy that has all of your scene structure. So we'll have your scenes, a folder for scenes, we'll have a folder for images, source images, and all of this other stuff. Now we don't need all of this other stuff, but we're going to create that stuff anyway, because why not? Now, when it comes to choosing the location, in this particular case, I've already done this. However, if I would make a new one, and then under here where it says location, then you can choose where you would want that location to be. And let's just say, I'll put it in here as test. So what I'll do is I'll go back up where my new project is here. I'm going to create a new folder. This is going to be called test. I'm going to select that folder. And now, when I press accept, what it will do is it will create that folder. Oh, that folder's already created, but it will then create all of the file hierarchy within that folder. And our renders are going to go into the images folder of that project folder that has just been created. Now I'm not going to press accept this time because I don't want to create another thing, but if I was, it would essentially create all of these as folders within this new folder that we created. And then when we render, our images will go into this images folder. So I'll cancel that for the time being. Okay, so once we've done that, we can come over to hardware 2.0. There isn't anything that we need to change in the settings here. The default settings for this will work perfectly fine for our purposes. There is some anti-aliasing down here if you want to enable some anti-aliasing. In this particular case, again, as we're not really going to be seeing this in a diffuse channel, it's going to be displacing pixels behind it. We really don't need the quality to be uber smooth. So that's a subjective thing. But anyway, so we're going to close that. Now to render this out, what we're going to do is we're going to come to our drop down tab. We go to rendering, and then we come to render, and then we go batch render. You can click up the option box, but for hardware 2.0 it will just give you an error and say there are no options. So just click batch render, and this will start rendering these frames out. Now the beautiful thing about hardware is it renders exceedingly quickly. It generally doesn't do very good quality renders or have much in the way of editability for most things, but when it comes to rendering out alphas or masks or even smoke effects like this is a fantastic way to do this very quickly. This, even on a mid to low level computer, this 600 frames of smoke sequence would render out in something between 30 seconds to a minute in total, which is great. Cool, so we're not going to render that out. I've already rendered that out, and I have those saved in a folder over here. And I have my 800 frames in here. We can click on one of these and open it up, and we can see we have our smoke. Now, if your image tool is this, you can sit there and hold the left key or the right key, the two arrow keys, the directional D-pad keys, and you'll get a loose idea of whether or not it's doing the thing you want it to do. In this particular case, we can see that it's looking like smoke, sort of. So I'm going to close that down for now. All right, now that's the Maya component. Now, for the Unreal component, I will close this scene. Go and save that. No, go away. All right, now it's time to launch Unreal. And we wait. Cool, now I'm going to open up my Project 3 here. This level just here. So, yes, I'm going to open this. Give it a few moments to do its things. Now in this scene, I already have the effects set up. It will take a little bit of time for the scene to kick into flavor. Cancel that. Come to here. Engine scalability settings are set good. Mirage effect A, Mirage effect B. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, I see what's happened here. So something has not saved. I must have saved a material. Anyway, that doesn't matter. I'll quickly go into that material, and I will come down to here. I shall save that. Alright, so if we come to this sequence here, we enter the sequence, so I have my sequence here. If I double click this sequence, and I come into here and I press spacebar to play the effect, it's subtle, but in the background we should see some very subtle warping of that environment. If I come and zoom in to make it a bit clearer, I can come and select my Mirage effect plane, come and press focus on that, and as we can see the environment. I have a bigger plane, I had the front plane. We can see that our environment is now being warped, kind of like a heat effect. If I was to hide this effect, that's without, this is with. Okay, so once we get to there, what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the start of my scene. So this is essentially my scene here, and we're going to go and recreate this material essentially. So this is basically just a material that will get applied to a plane, and then you can place that plane wherever you want to have this effect. Alright, so let's start this from scratch. So I'm going to leave the plane here. Actually, no, I'll just delete the plane by the way. So we'll delete that. I'll delete the sequence there. And cool. Okay. I'll also delete this media asset here. And I don't really care about this sequence for the time being either. We can delete that sequence there. Alright, cool. We're starting from scratch here. My timeline's looping here, just as a handy tip. If you want your timeline to constantly loop, this little button here will make it go from no looping to looping, which is a handy little thing to find. Okay, so what we're going to do is we could create this material from scratch, but I'm going to utilize a material that's already made because it'll already have all of its settings mostly set up the way that we want them. So what I'm going to do is, for starters, I'm going to create my planes. So I'm going to come into the add to project drop down. I'm going to come to shapes and I'm going to add plane. Now this is going to place a plane randomly in my scene. Press F. I can rotate this plane down, rotate it across, and this is going to be a plane that we scale up, and we can go and place this around the scene. For the time being, I'm just going to put it here, and we'll go and place it once we've actually created the material. So I'm going to do that. Make it stretch the whole length of the road, like so. And there we go, we have our plane. Now, I'm going to put a material on this plane. So for now, I'm going to close my sequencer. I'm going to open my content drawer. And in my content drawer, I'll delete all of these. Sorry, bear with me. We can delete that. Force delete. Okay, so in my content browser, I'm going to come to my starter content folder. Now, you should have a starter content folder, and if you don't, we only need one attribute on the material, and I can show you how to make that when we get to that. But for now, we're going to come to that starter folder, or you can go search for it from some other starter folder and copy and paste that U asset into your materials folder. But we're going to search for heat. Now this is going to give us access to this m_heat_distortion material. Now we're not going to use really anything that they've set up in it. We're going to make it custom ourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this, and then the ideal thing would be to then duplicate this material, and then we're going to call it whatever we want this to be called, and this is going to be called, I'm going to call this Mirage Effect Matte. Now obviously it's disappeared from here because I have heat in the search bar. So if I now type in Mirage, if I spell it right, now I have this material here. So I can take this and I can now apply this to my material. Now ideally it'd be a good idea to actually take this material and put it into your materials folder. remove here. Could not be renamed. Close. That's fine. Okay, so now I have my Mirage effect material on my object, and we're going to need to then go and modify this material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click that material, and then what's going to happen is you're going to get the material spaghetti graph open up like so. Alright, so now this material is one that I've already edited, and I edited the original one because I'm an idiot, which means that it's not going to have all the connections that we want, but it doesn't matter. Essentially, this would be connected, this is connected into here normally, and then this is a different node, and that's what helps achieve the effect. Okay, so however, in this particular case, we're going to recreate this from scratch. So we don't need any of this. All of this stuff can be deleted. Delete. So what we need is this material is it's a surface material in terms of the domain. It's translucent is the setting for here. We're going to be leaving it unlit in terms of the options on this material. The other things that are important, this here is the next important part. Where it says refraction, by default, that material that we just loaded in will be set to index of refraction. Now, that's handy. However, there's no way to mask that refraction away from, there probably is, but I don't know how to do it. But if we have that set on, the shape that this material is applied to will always have some level of refraction. And even if we like alpha cut out the material, that refraction will still be there. So what we want instead is we want to 2D offset. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to allow us to use that smoke that we just made as a 2D offset to warp or displace the pixels behind that area. So once we've got that set, there's a few other things that we have to do. Now we have to pull in a sequence, an image sequence, in order to be able to plug data into this material. So we have our material here. So for the time being, I can close that down. I will save this material as is for the time being. And there we go. So now that material is saved. Okay, so we're going to come to our content drawer. In our content drawer, I'm going to start with, I'm going to create a folder called movies. So to do that, we can come to our starter content. We can go new folder, and then it'll come up with a prompt to name it movies, and you'll have a folder in here. And then we'll have, and then I'm going to make a new folder in there as well. So I'll make a new folder in here. So I'm going to come to here, new folder. This folder inside this movies tab is going to be called smoke screen SEQ for sequence. Now that I've got that, I'll have a new folder in this movies folder. And now we need to do something a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to this folder here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to show in Explorer. That will open the window where that folder exists in your project. And then I'm going to pull over this window here. Now these were my rendered out frames. So these were my frames rendered from 0 to blah 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 of my smoke. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first one, scroll all the way down to the bottom, select the last one, and I'm going to drag and drop them from here into here. Wait for them to copy. And now they're all in here. Now you'll see a pop-up here. What we need to do now is we can close both of those folders. This is basically asking, do you want to bring these 800 files into Unreal? And we want to say no. We do not want to import these into Unreal. We want them in the folder, but we don't want Unreal to really recognize them as 800 frames. And the reason for this is to just reduce clutter. We don't want to see 800 frames in our content browser when we come into our smoke screen folder. We just want to see the nodes that utilize those frames. So we're going to say no, don't import. Now that that's been done, we're going to come back to our content drawer, and now we can get rid of this in the thing. Now when we come into our smokescreen folder, we have nothing in here. So we need to start creating some things. Basically, we're going to create a file node that will hold the image sequence that we've just rendered out. And then we need to create a media player that will allow us to place it on the timeline or into a sequence. So we're going to right click, we're going to come to media first, we're going to go image media source or IMG media source. I'm going to call this Mirage SEQ underscore IMG. And then once we've done that, I'm going to double click that. And then with this, essentially we're going to use this, this is our bucket for where we put all of our pictures. Now we only need to choose one of the pictures, but we're also, if for some reason it looks like this, just make sure that you come and select it over to details. There's a few options in here that you can play with for looping and for shuffling and so on and so forth. We're going to go to details. In here, all of this we leave alone. This we leave alone. This here is the sequence path. This is where the images are stored. So we're going to click on the three little dots, and we can navigate to our smokescreen SEQ. We can select just the first frame. We can go open. And the other option that we get access to here is frame rate override. So because these are rendered out as still sequenced images, we will need to choose this. So I'm going to set them to 24 FPS, as that's what my Maya scene was set to. Cool, so that's done. That's done. Now we press save, and we can close that down. Now we come back to our content drawer, and we need to make two more things. So we're going to come back, right click again, media, and we're going to create the media player that will allow us to play this in a sequence. So create the media player. It's going to come up with an option box, and this option box is saying video output media texture asset. So once we create this, we can then essentially create a texture from this media player asset, and then that texture we can use in our material node graph to plug into the material to perform the required effect. So we're going to say yes to this. We're going to go OK. It's going to create this media player, and again I'm going to call this MP underscore Mirage. Now once we do that, it automatically creates this, and that's what that checkbox was for. When we click that checkbox, it automatically made this connected to this. Cool. And once you come in here, you have a bunch of settings to play with. We don't need to do anything in these just for the second. We can leave these alone. However, if you have multiple, or if you created the texture without creating the media player, this is where you'll find any other media players that you might want to plug into this to be able to use that texture across multiple media players or multiple sequences or whatnot. So we don't need that for the time being. So once we have done that, what we can do from here is we need to use this now in our material graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to this material over here where my material is. I'm going to double click. It's going to open up my graph. I'm going to open up my content drawer, and I'm going to drag and drop this Mirage video section into here. Now this is going to come in as a texture swatch, and now we can use this essentially just as a normal texture to do things in our scene. Alright, so I'm going to pull this off to the side for just 1 second. Bear with me while I get my bearings on what I'm doing. So just let me double check some things. That is correct. Yes, that's correct. Yes. I didn't do anything there. I just checked a thing. And then we come to our media player. I just want to check my media player. Yes, I don't need anything from there. That's all good. Cool. Okay. Now, what we're going to do next is, before we get back to our material and we start playing with that, we're going to first create the sequence for this smoke. So we're going to come to our level sequence. We're going to add level sequence, and we're going to choose somewhere to save it. Now I'm going to save this in my starter content folder under movies, and I'm going to save it in my smoke screen folder that I created before, and I'm going to call this Mirage SEQ. Maybe I'll call it Mirage. Yeah, that'll be fine. Mirage SEQ. Cool. Now I have my Mirage sequence here. Now what I'm going to do, I have a sequence here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically drag and drop my smokescreen image sequence into that area. So this is always a little bit of a problem sometimes, so I like to just press dock in layout over here. Bear with me 1 second. So now I can pull that up. I've got that content browser out of my thing. We can navigate to our movies folder, smoke screen, and now I'm going to drag and drop my Mirage sequence image from here into here. This is going to place that sequence on the timeline. I'm also now going to, in order for this to work, I now have to connect this to the media player so that it knows that it's a sequence that needs to be played back. So select the clip that has been placed in here, right click, properties, and then we have the image sequence plugged in, but we don't have a media texture plugged in. So again, you can come to the drop down box here and find the media player that you created for this particular task, which is just here. Now that we've done that, we will have that that will now actually be a sequence that will run. Now it's not going to show up on here because we haven't plugged it into our material yet, so now we get to go and do that. So once again, we can select this, and I have my material here, so I'm going to double click. That's going to pull up my spaghetti graph, and now I have this in here and I have this in here. So what I need to do from here is I'm going to create an inverse linear interpolate. So this is just going to basically reverse this map that we've got in here, and I'm going to set RGB. It's going to plug into the alpha channel of this, and all of the default settings are going to be left alone, and then this is going to get plugged into the refraction, and it's also going to get plugged into opacity. There we go. Now I'm going to save this, and if it wants to be nice to me, when I come to here and press play, we can see that effect now starting to happen. Now there's a few things to consider with this. For starters, I've scaled this plane the wrong way. The texture's going this way, and I've scaled the plane out this way. So I need to fix that up, so I'll just scale this back. I'll scale it up this way. Now I can rotate it down and place it down here. I'll set my timeline to loop so that it constantly loops. And now, as we can see, again, this effect is subtle. It's not intended to be a huge, crazy effect. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to offset this frame player as well. So I'm going to set the frame count of my sequence to, say, 300. And then I'm also going to then take this clip and drag this clip back somewhere in the middle of the clip so that I'm always getting the heavier side of the clip. Now, you could take these frames into After Effects and do some reversing, and then pairing them together in the middle to make a seamless loopable clip. But I'm not going to worry about that for the time being, as this is essentially intended for like a cinematic shot, and I have the full duration of the displacement happening for that effect. So this obviously looks horrible right here in the foreground, because that's not really where this is intended to be. However, we can then scale this up, and then we can scale it out so that it more represents the initial effect. And now we have that mirage effect. Now, I don't want to have it here. Generally speaking, you can have it in two places, or there's a few places that you can have it. We can have it essentially over in the distance would be my... There we go. Sorry, bear with me while I muscle my way through Unreal. Scale that up. Scale that out. I'm going to set this to 50. No, I'm going to set this to 100. Up. And now in our background, if we position it correctly, we should be seeing very subtle warping of our background. And that's sort of how we create that effect. And then we can take that effect, show in folder. Sorry, bear with me. Take that effect, and we can apply that effect now to our other plane down here. And now we'll have that mirage effect in our background, providing us with displacement. Now again, this is a subtle effect, but this is a great way to add that little bit of extra to your scene. One thing I do want to show you quickly before we sort of finish this up. You may run into the issue where, if we open up our material, if you have not set, where is it, this here, under the refraction method here, where it says the refraction method, if this is left on the refraction, and we save this, one thing that you'll note is that this material will refract wholly, irrespective of the fact that we've made an opacity mask for it. So as you can see, there's like a piece here of the landscape that's being like essentially mirrored from down here, and we don't really want the material to do that. We want the material to be alpharable, and in order to do that, we're going to set it from index of refraction and again to 2D offset. So if you find that if you have that issue where it's sort of acting a bit like a mirror, you can come into here and set this to under refraction to 2D offset, and that will solve that issue. Plug this into the normal as well. There we go. And now we have our effect. And then it's a matter of positioning this to achieve it, and to do the thing that you want it to do, essentially. And now, very, very subtly, we'll just see that our environment off in the distance is just ever so slightly being warped and morphed around. this out to a few larger frames so we can then see that in action. And if the effect is too strong, you can also then you plug in, say, a linear interp node. You can come into here. You can plug in a linear interp. If you type in lerp, it'll come up. And then you can just plug in a value of 0 to one side, and then you can plug this value for any of these maps into the other side, and essentially you'll then have the ability to sort of up or down the strength of the effect as it gets plugged back into the refraction. And that's essentially it. And there we have it. Mirage. Thanks for watching.